that you have prepared for later in the program. Would you please raise your hands with those, and the ushers will come around and gather those. We will have time for those of you who have not put questions together and choose to do this later, but if you have them available now, please raise your hand and the ushers will gather them. Will those who are able please rise for the singing of our national anthem? We will be led by Gerald Crawford, Emeritus Professor of Singing from Oberlin College, and he will be accompanied by Carol Longsworth. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 4th Congressional District Candidate Debate, sponsored by the League of Women Voters in the Oberlin area. The League is a nonpartisan organization dedicated to voter education and to encouraging the widest possible participation in our elections. I'm Sharon Fairchild Susie, Vice President of Oberlin City Council, and I will be your moderator this evening. Before I introduce our panel and our candidates, I must review some ground rules. Please silence your cell phones. Not only silence them, but there will be no taking of pictures or videotaping during the course of the debates. In the interest of nonpartisanship, to which the League of Women Voters is committed, no banners or signs are permitted during the debate. If you brought something with you, please slide it under your seat. Please do not applaud or express support or displeasure with candidates' statements. It is my pleasure to introduce and to welcome the 3 candidates for the newly formulated 4th Congressional District. As you know, this new district encompasses parts of our own Lorain County. I will ask the candidates to raise their hand as I mention their names. Mr. Jim Jordan is the incumbent representing the 4th District in Congress since 2007. Mr. Jordan is a candidate of the Republican Party. Mr. Chris Calla is from Lima, Ohio, and he is running for public office for the first time. Mr. Calla is a candidate of the Libertarian Party. Mr. Jim Sloan is a graduate of Lorain County Community College and president of the Lorain County UAW CAP. Mr. Sloan is a candidate of the Democratic Party. You will find additional biographical information in your programs, and we thank each of them for being here. Our panelists tonight are familiar to many of you in this room. We welcome first Dr. Roy Church. If you would stand, Dr. Church, for a moment, as president of Lorain County Community College for 25 years. Thank you, Dr. Church. Bruce Simonson has lived in Oberlin for over 30 years. He is professor of geology at Oberlin College. Welcome, Mr. Simonson. Andy Young has been the editor of the Chronicle Telegram since 1997. He has also worked as a news reporter at station WEOL. Thank you for being here, Mr. Young. We're grateful for your participation this evening. During the debate, audience members may raise their hands to request a card if you haven't already turned one in. You may write a question to the candidates on that card, raise your hand with the card, and at any time during the debate, an usher will come, gather those, and we will use those later in the evening. We will begin with questions on the economy for Andy Young. The first question will be directed to Mr. Jordan, who will have 2 minutes to answer. Mr. Calla and Mr. Sloan will then have 1 minute each to respond. This section of the debate will continue for 20 minutes. Mr. Young.
Thank you. My first question is as follows. Science and technology have been responsible for over half the growth of the U.S. economy since World War II, when the federal government put a much higher priority on peacetime funding for science education and research. Several recent reports question America's continued leadership in these vital areas. In fact, there's one out today that looks at state funding for research universities. That one's from the National Science Foundation. My question concerns federal policies. What federal policies will best ensure that America remains a world leader in innovation, and how should those policies be funded?
Well, I would, first let me thank one of the voters for having this forum tonight. I appreciate that. I wouldn't necessarily say federal funding is going to be the answer. The answer is creating a framework in our economy that's conducive to economic growth. When you get economic growth, lots of good things happen. You get expanded opportunity, expanded jobs, a growing economy in all areas of our economy. So I would argue right now what we're seeing, unfortunately, from Washington, particularly this administration, is they're doing everything wrong. Wrong tax policy, wrong regulatory policy, wrong energy policy, wrong monetary policy. At some point we're going to have to get back to sound money, and certainly wrong fiscal policy. You can't keep spending more than you take in. So we need to change the framework and create a context and a framework that's conducive to economic growth. I'll just use one example. How many of you think the tax code is how many of you think we need a new tax code? I do this in every group I talk to, and everyone gets it, we need a new tax code. Think about this. Any tax code on the personal side which says to 47% of the population you're not going to participate in the main tax is broken. And any tax code on the corporate side which says to American companies you're going to pay the highest tax rate in the world is stupid. So if it's broken and stupid, you might want to start over. So we got to create the right kind of policies that are conducive to growth. When you get growth, you get innovation. You get advances in technology, which America has always led the world, and you get advances in medicine, advances in cures for those diseases we're trying to. You get all kinds of good things that happen when you have a growing, vibrant economy. That doesn't happen when you got the wrong policies in place, and you got this uncertainty hanging over the heads of so many in our economy today. And that's what's got to change.
First, I also want to thank the voters for having our night tonight. To address specifically your point of how America can remain in the forefront of innovation, I think it does come back to education. And I think that the federal policy should be directed towards returning education to the actual teachers in the classroom and letting them drive how kids need to be educated. People in small communities, in local schools, have a firm grasp on what their communities need in order to drive technological innovation so that we can have growth. Growth without American students who are properly educated to fill those jobs will not result in prosperity in America. It's about making sure that American kids are educated properly with American schools. by American teachers making those choices, not from choices in Washington, telling them how to educate and trying to drive in Washington.
Yes, I also would like to thank the League of Women Voters for having us here tonight. Thank you so very much. One of the things that bothers me is that, yes, we do need to keep our education growing stronger, and if we have to do this through taxes or whatever, as Congressman Jordan has said, if something's broken, we need to fix it. He's been there, and he's had the opportunity to fix it. So I would think that, if it's broken, it needs to be fixed, people need to be working on fixing it. If not, then we need to be replacing Congress. This Congress has the lowest rating of any Congress that we've ever had. So it's time for us to start working on getting those monies back here, back into the counties, and start letting teachers be teachers again.
Mr. Young, if I may interrupt for just a moment, to the candidates. We're fortunate to have Willa Rosenberg Rubin here this evening. She's a young lady in the first row, and she will be giving you signals directed to your time. Thank you.
Second question, which goes first to Mr. Callow. Given the large government budget deficit, what measures would you propose to increase revenue? What programs would you cut, and why?
First off, I want to thank you for giving me the best question. First off, I think that it's a twofold problem with revenue and spending. First off, though, I believe we have to cut spending first. And it's important that when we talk about cutting spending, we talk about cutting spending across the federal government. There can't be any pet projects. We can't say that we're going to go after entitlement spending, or we're not going to touch military spending. You can't go after military spending and say that we're not going to touch entitlement. I'm a big proponent in cutting spending 43 cents for every dollar that we currently spend. That's at a rate that we're currently borrowing at, 43 cents for every dollar that we spend, and having that come out of all federal programming rather than targeting a specific political category to somehow score a political point. I think that if we don't take those kind of measures, we might slip past the point of no return. As far as revenue-wise, I do favor a fair tax, which is elimination entirely of federal taxes through payroll and income tax, and replacing it with a national consumption tax that will be applied to all Americans equally, so they can't be played off of one another, where a tax break is for the rich or a tax break for the middle class. It will apply to all goods purchased, all new goods purchased, and will affect all Americans equally. It's a very daring and interesting plan. Available fairtax.org for more detail. But it's a revenue neutral plan, and if we cut spending and keep revenue where it's at, we should be able to dig our way out of the hole we've put ourselves in.
Yes, I also believe that we do need to cut spending, but at the same time, I do believe that to raise our revenue, we need to start making our people who make the most money start paying their fair share of the taxes. Because right now, we have people who are making millions and millions and millions of dollars who are paying no income tax. And we need to raise the revenue through raising those taxes. We need to start working on getting those taxes up. We need to start cutting on some of our revenues. But at the same time, I really believe that I see us. Okay. I really believe that when we start cutting our taxes, we can run into some real problems there, especially in this economy.
Yeah, I've offered the only budget that gets the balance. The balance is in 5 years. We have to cut spending. The problem in Washington is a spending problem. It's not a revenue problem like Mr. Taylor. That everything has to be on the table. You got a debt bigger than your annual economy. You got to change things. The greatest nation in history now has a $16 trillion debt, $15.5 trillion annual economy. You have to change things. We got to look at all areas of spending. I get it, but this idea that you need revenue and you need to raise taxes, it's just flat wrong. Politicians have been promising this forever. They always say, "Oh, well, we promise. Raise $1 in taxes. We promise in the future we'll cut for every dollar in taxes. We'll cut $3 in spending. For For every dollar in tax, we'll cut $9. They always give you this promise, and I always remind folks, remember, this is a promise from politicians, a promise from Congress, not a promise from your wife, not a promise from your husband, not a promise from your parents, not a promise from your pastor or your priest. It's a promise from politicians, and they've never kept their word. So we cannot go down, this is Charlie Brown and Lucy in the football. We cannot fall for this again. It's a spending problem, we have to cut it. What we do need is economic growth, which is back to the first point I made. Create those policies that are conducive to growing our economy.
I'm going to ask a related question, and this question goes to Mr. Sloan first. How would you revise the current federal tax system to encourage fairness while not discouraging private enterprise or cutting basic research?
Well, first of all, I would think that one of the things that we need to do in our research is that we need to increase research. We need to increase our availability to be able to raise revenues so that we can work on the different the problems that we have as far as lost my train. I'm sorry, but as we work on raising some of those revenues, working on some of the different things that we need to work on, I believe that we should act. And let me just stop there. Since I lost my train, I will just go on.
Well, again, everyone understands the tax code needs to be changed. I actually think there are two ways to do it. Fundamentally change the tax code. One is the plan that Chris mentioned, which is to go to a fair tax, a consumption-based national sales tax. The only problem with that is you first have to get rid of the income tax, and that takes a constitutional amendment, which is a difficult process. I think, frankly, if we're going to change the Constitution, it should be focused on a balanced budget amendment, which is something we pushed for and advocated last year in the midst of the debt ceiling debate. So I would be much more in favor of, and I think it's politically feasible, more feasible, going to a flat tax. That kind of approach. So the approach we offered in our budget that got to balance was a two-rate, on the personal side, a two-rate system, flatter, fairer, simpler. Those countries that have moved to a simpler tax code have stronger economic growth, and that's something we need to look at. But I would think a flat tax, one or two rate flat tax type of approach is the most politically feasible and one that makes sense.
As I stated, I believe that we could make do with getting rid of all the tax bureaucracy that we have at the federal level by adopting a fair tax that uses the current system of collecting sales tax and just applies that to the national consumption tax. I applaud the support of a balanced budget amendment to help balance the budget and repeal the income tax. Let's roll those on together. I think we can agree on that. But the idea of a consumption tax applying to all Americans equally, there can be no argument about who belongs in which bracket, what those different brackets should be. If it's applied evenly to all Americans, if, for instance, Congress goes back on their word, we heard about promises from politicians, it'll have to apply to everyone, not just the middle class who they promise not to raise their taxes, or not just the upper class who they promise to cut their taxes.
The next question goes to Mr. Jordan. We're back to him as the leader. Areas of Lorain County are new to this district. What specifically would you do to improve the economy of cities in the district, such as Elyria, Amherst, Wellington, which is Village?
We would, again, I always am amazed that politicians just stand up and say, you know, we're going to create jobs, as if some politician in Washington, of all places, is going to create. Elected class doesn't create jobs. What we can do, and what I referenced earlier, is we can help create a framework that favors job creation, a framework and a context that is conducive to economic growth. That's what we got to focus on. I've said many times, if big government spending, big government taxation, big government regulation, if that were going to get us out of this economic downturn we've been in, well, for goodness sake, we'd have been out of it a long time ago, because that's all the government's done for the last 4 years. And let me just say this too. It's not just the other party. It started with the last administration. President Bush spent too much money. I thought he was a good president in many ways, but he spent too much money. He started the auto bailout. He started the bank bailout. This idea that government's going to pick the winners and losers and it's too big to fail and bail. I voted against all that because it's wrong. Markets work. Let's let the 310 million people in this country decide what's best, not politicians in Washington picking this winner like Solyndra that they thought was a great investment with your tax dollars, or Beacon Power, which also went bankrupt, or Abound Solar, which also went Let's let the market work. So the idea is a framework that's conducive to growth. Right now, there's a story just 2 weeks ago, front page, $2.3 trillion in corporate money sitting on the sidelines because everyone's nervous. All the uncertainty out there, they're not letting loose the money that they typically would. Typically, there's about $800 billion sitting in these accounts. There's now over $2 trillion because they don't know what's coming with the taxes, the tax increases that are slated to take place at the end of this year. They don't know what's coming with healthcare. They're not sure what new regulations are. It's a complete, it's an environment that's completely harmful to economic growth. And so we got to change that. And that's, again, that's a fundamental question of this election. And we're going to decide here in 42 days.
Yes, I believe in the area of Warren County, as far as improving the economy, we have to start out with educating our people here in Warren County. But the other thing we can talk about, as we've talked before, we can't talk about any type of education and any type of growth in jobs unless we talk about the economic development. I think when we look at Warren County Community College, or we look at the joint vocational school, we have to take a look at educating our people to do those jobs. Right now, there are jobs in Warren County that we cannot fill because we don't have the people educated for those jobs. So our job would be to appropriate the money, to appropriate the funds so that our children can go out and they can get the loans, the student loans, the things that they need, so that we can educate them and put them to work at JVS and some of the jobs that are at Warren County Community College. And I'm always amazed is that people can go to school on loans, they can go to school on scholarships, but then when it comes time to vote, to help us get other kids in, they don't. Thank you.
Yes, I think that as we go forward, I think it's very, very clear that Washington is not able to solve its own problems. I don't know if it's able to come to the rescue of any part of the 4th District. I think that if we are going to have continued federal dollars directed this way for economic development, that should be placed in the hands of the people who actually live here, and they can direct it. Local control is always the best. I think that if, in a perfect world, if I had my way, and I could get more people like me in the office with me, in 10 years, the election for Congress would be less important than your election for City Council. Because there's no need that we should have federal funds coming here to fix a problem. Communities have been able to fix their own problems. They've been able to direct what they need rather than have somebody from Washington decide that we're going to provide X number of dollars for economic development when what we might need is education development or another track.
My next question was one that, the subject was one that the Congressman mentioned in his answer to the last question. The question is this: should the federal government have bailed out GM and Chrysler? Why or why not? Mr. Kellogg is the first crack at that.
No. I could leave it at that, but no. When we come into business, when you start your own business, or whether you work for a business, that business is trying to do its best to earn a profit, both for its shareholders, its owners, and when that company wants to reap the rewards of being capitalist and going after profit, it also must bear the risk of going bankrupt when it makes poor decisions. And that's the very nature of how capitalism works. It got us to where we are now in terms of the greatest country in the world, and to abandon it because we wanted to protect an automaker because we deemed that it was too big to fail, flies in the face of that. If you socialize the risk but privatize the reward, then everyone will want a piece of that action, and that's where we're headed. We mentioned some power companies that have gone bankrupt after they absorbed some of their risk through the federal government providing them grants. That's not the way the system is supposed to work, and we all know that. You can't play the game with someone else's money, and that's what we ended up doing after the fact, after they'd already made the wrong choices. If we're going to move forward, we have to understand that if a company makes a poor choice, it does go bankrupt, then we have enough airlines that have done it, and we have planes in the air. What would have happened to GM if they had gone bankrupt? I don't know for certain how it would end up, but I do know that we would still have cars being made in America by Americans. And we wouldn't have to be worried about the next bailout down the road when another company comes along that we deem as too big to fail. Mr. Jordan?
Yeah, I would just say this, there was going to be a restructuring of GM. The question is, do you want to use the established process of the courts, or do you want to use the political process where the government decides how the money gets divvied up, your money? Whenever you travel down that road, it's dangerous. I mentioned the loan guarantee program with the Department of Energy. Just understand what our government is doing with your tax dollars, this administration. 26 companies got your tax dollars, 15.1 billion of them in the loan guarantee program. 22 of those companies had a credit rating of double B-, which is a fancy way of saying they were junk. No private capital, no private equity would go there, but it was okay for them to give them your tax dollars. Those 22 companies, 3 of them went bankrupt: Solyndra, Beacon Power, and Abound Solar, and more are to follow. That's what happens when you travel down this road. Sure, there need to be a restructuring. There could have been some order placed to it by elected officials, I get that. But no way should we have traveled what we did with all this government picking this winners and playing this game, because it's simply unfair to the people who are in business who don't get help from the government, who don't get help from the taxpayers, and that's the problem when you start down this road. It's tough to turn back.
Yes, first of all, I would like to explain to the audience here that was not a bailout, that was a loan to General Motors, because if it would have been a bailout, it would have meant that they were given the money.
Well, it's Solyndra too, and they're bankrupt. I mean, that's a problem.
I'm answering the question. If you would like to hold on, then please do. This is my minute. But it wasn't a bailout. It was a loan because the government is making money as a profit from that loan. They're getting paid back. 850,000 jobs have been saved. What you have to look at down the road is this, is that if we would have let General Motors go bankrupt, look at all the other small independent businesses that would have went bankrupt with them. This was not just a bankruptcy restructuring, this was a liquidation here in America, and we cannot let that happen. We have to be able to protect those people who are in business. We would have been in a deep, deep depression had it not been for that loan to General Motors.
The next question goes first to Mr. Sloan. What would you do to reverse the decline in median income in the county, which has fallen 12% since 2005 and 21% since 1999?
Well, the first thing we have to do with the median income is we have to be able to create jobs. We have to have the ability to put our people back to work, because we have lost so many jobs out of our county, out of our country, that it's time for us to start bringing jobs back home, making jobs affordable back here, and to increase the median income in Warren County. The minimum wage is not a living wage. That is not an income that we can live with. And I know that there are people that think that the $7.25 or $7.65 an hour is way too high. It is not. A living wage is not even $10 an hour. You cannot support a family on that. So we need to bring jobs back into this